Я тут, бо це моя країна. Тут мій дім. Тут мій народ. Захистимо Україну разом. Мобілізація.
Громадське потребує вашої допомоги. Громадське належить українцям і є некомерційним проектом. Підтримати громадське можна, перерахувавши гроші через PayPal, Приват24 або Money.ua. Ми існуємо, тому що ви нас підтримуєте.
This is Hromadske International Sunday Show, our weekly program, the only prime-time program in English, covering not only current Ukrainian affairs, but also looking closely into Eastern European geopolitical storm. My name is Angelina Karyakina. We're now talking out of our Kyiv headquarters, and tonight I'm hosting this show on my own. My colleagues are out, co-anchors are out doing some really important and interesting work, which I hope they will share with us really soon. Past few days days and past few weeks, mostly the past week, was bringing in some really grim news. Boris Nemtsov, the leader of Russian opposition, killed on Friday night in Moscow. Despite the ceasefire, the announced ceasefire in the eastern Ukraine, more death, more news from the eastern Ukrainian photographer and journalist Sergei Nikolaev was killed in Pisky. Some news from Kyiv as well. The former deputy head of Party of Regions factions in the parliament, Mikhailo Chechetov, allegedly committed suicide here in Kyiv, jumping out of his window. We'll look into different news, into key news of this week. We'll also talk about economy, about plunging Hryvnia. We'll talk about the anniversary of Crimean annexation, and we'll also talk about some diplomacy, some aid coming from the Great Britain. We'll talk to our guests from London and Moscow and other cities. But we'll start from Moscow mainly. It's obviously the top news of the passing week. We have on Skype Leonid from Moscow, who was at the scene of the murder and who is also taking part in today's memorial demonstration in Moscow. Just to remind our viewers that several weeks ago there was a planned demo in Moscow, anti-war, anti-crisis demonstration, but after the killing of Boris Nemtsov, it quickly turned into a memorial demonstration which took place not only in Moscow but other Russian cities. So we have Leonid on Skype, and we would like to talk to him. How did it go in Moscow? Leonid, good evening. Do you hear us?
Really well. Hello.
Leonid, how many people were there at this demo, and what were the general moods today in Moscow?
At this very moment, I'll stop hearing you, but I kind of heard the question about the turnout, I guess. And the turnout was quite massive by Moscow, not Kyiv standards. It was the independent observers were counting people at the metal detectors at the beginning of the route. They counted over 50,000 people, which is a good turnout because all previous rallies had a turnout of about 30,000 people. So this is pretty good, although it's uncomparable to anything I've seen in Kyiv during Maidan.
Yes, Leonid, we know that the idea of the march quickly changed from the idea as it was planned as an anti-war, anti-crisis march, but it quickly changed into a memorial, Boris Nemtsov memorial demonstration. What were the moods? What were people talking there at this march mainly?
Yes, indeed. It was initially planned as an anti-crisis, an anti-war march, and it was due to be held on the outskirts of Moscow in the area called Hryvnia. But after the death of Boris Nemtsov, it was moved to the center of Moscow. It was held right under the Kremlin walls, and people passed by the spot where Boris Nemtsov was killed. The atmosphere, I would say, was very somber, and people went quietly, and they were walking for a long time. It was a infuriatingly slow procession that passed along the embankment on the Moscow River and then the Kremlin and then onto the Hromadske bridge. So people were hardly ever chanting, they were walking quietly, and I guess the prevailing sentiment was sadness rather than outrage. There was, I didn't hear anybody saying that we should sort of charge at the Kremlin or we should start some radical action. No, people were just walking past the Kremlin, and they seemed to be mournful and also slightly unsure what to do next because everybody is seeing that the protest is still not sufficient to start any meaningful movement towards the change of the regime in the country.
Leonid, many observers say that with all the moods, with all the rhetoric coming from the Russian federal channels and with all the moods in the country, that violence somehow was inevitable. Do you think this is really the case, and why, if yes, why do you think that violence was inevitable?
I've actually seen quite a few posters and banners attacking the Russian television. And I guess the most popular slogan today was propaganda kills. So yes, many people do connect the tone and the character of the materials on the Central Russian TV with the fact that Boris Nemtsov was killed on Friday. Yes, many people do believe that television, the government-run television, has created an atmosphere in which such killings become possible. Because yes, indeed, the television is pouring loads and loads of hate messages on its audiences in Russia, and considering that there is very little access to other sources of information, people are essentially being plunged into this sea of hatred.
Ladies, we also know that the motto of this demonstration was "Heroes don't die," with a direct reference to what we had here, what we witnessed here in Maidan. Is there something in the agenda of the people who were planning to take part in this demonstration, or in the message, anything similar to Maidan's agenda, to Maidan's message?
Well, there were many references to Ukraine and to the war in Ukraine, and most protesters I've spoken to believe that it is the Russian government waging this war, and it is only up to Putin and members of his government that these are the people who can stop this war, and they're the only perpetrators and the only people responsible for it. I don't think there was a huge difference in the attitude towards something more radical, something more reminiscent of Maidan. And I spoke about this too to various people, and people were saying that no, a revolution, a Maidan-style revolution in Russia is impossible at the moment, and the reason being that the majority of the population still supports Putin, that the anti-Putin protests, although people can turn up in high numbers, that is still insufficient to topple a government which is much stronger than Yanukovych's government was in Ukraine, and that has a much greater repressive apparatus that can be thrown against the protesters should they decide to revolt.
Leonid, this is actually what I was going to ask you about. Many say that this murder is a kind of a game changer in political life in Russia. What do you think does it really change or may change in political life in Russia?
Well, yes, I also saw the people talking about describing it in terms of it being a watershed event. I don't think it's a watershed in terms of, it's not a turning point. It's not the event which will now rally hundreds of thousands and people will start charging at the Kremlin or doing anything radical in Moscow. We're still very far from this point, I think. What it might unfortunately lead to is more repressions against what the Russian government describes as the fifth column. It may indeed lead to more attacks on opposition figures like Nemtsov.
Thank you, Leonid, so much. Thank you, Leonid. So just for our viewers, we had from Moscow, Leonid Rogozin, freelance journalist who was visiting, who was witnessing actually the demonstration today in Moscow, who was at the scene of murder of Boris Nemtsov, very known Russian opposition leader. And now we will be switching to another section. We have a very appreciated guest tonight. Thank you so much for coming in our studio about economics, reform, and probably a little bit about plunging Hryvnia. We will talk to the Minister of Economy, Economic Development and Trade, Aivaras Abramovich. Thank you so much for coming. So our first question is, how do you assess the current state of affairs with economy? What is happening?
Good evening. Good to be here. Needless to say, economic situation remains very difficult. We had a very difficult 2014 when the economy declined 6.9%. We're expecting a 5% drop this year. But as we said a number of times already, government is going to do a lot of things, a lot of reforms to stabilize the situation, to stabilize banking system, replenish central bank reserves, bring back confidence into the banks in Ukraine, and clean up basically the system so that in 2016 we go back to the path of economic growth.
So what are the other reasons except for war on everything that is happening right now in Ukrainian economy?
No, war is obviously the main reason. We lost a good amount of territory. We lost a big chunk of economy, which
How
was
much?
very industrialized.
If we put some numbers.
We're talking about 20% of economy that is lost in very industrialized area, which normally is a big part of Ukrainian export. And the so much needed hard currency, which is lost, would have helped obviously the exchange rate if it was still working for the benefit of Ukrainian economy. So war was basically reason number one. Business confidence, investors' confidence in the country that is at war obviously is very low. So investments have gone down a lot. Weakening of the currency, weakening of the banking system was also very important in terms of reasons why economy has been so weak. Last year, 33 banks were nationalized. This year, 6 other banks have been nationalized. So the confidence right now in the banking system is rather limited.
How do you win back? How do you win it back? The trust of Ukrainians who will bring back their money to Ukrainian banks and the trust of investors?
Investors obviously want to see reforms, so do Ukrainian businessmen and Ukrainian population. For the banking system to regain confidence, first of all, we need to get the first tranche of International Monetary Fund and other international financial institutions. And this is going to happen fairly soon. Early next week, we need to pass a number of laws, the so-called prior actions, so that International Monetary Fund finally looks at the commitment of Ukraine to do reforms and makes a board decision to release the so much needed funds for Ukraine. Once we receive those funds, we have an opportunity to replenish central bank reserves. Once central bank reserves are replenished, obviously the confidence in the banking system would return. Then we expect also regaining of confidence for other parts of the economy and in the exchange rate and so on. Right now, a lot of exporters are selling goods abroad but not issuing invoices. So they keep the hard currency abroad, waiting for the exchange rate to stabilize and the banking system to stabilize. And once we have that, a good amount of foreign currency should return back home, and hopefully people that took money out of the banks, took deposits out of the banks,
bring them back?
Put them under the mattresses, obviously also is expected in a due time to return this money to the banks, so that banks start lending and obviously economy starts to move on. How
much money does Ukraine need to stabilize the system? If we have a specific number from the IMF, yes, we know it's over $17 billion, 17 and 500 million. So in your assessment, how much money does Ukraine need really?
The more the merrier, so to say. Obviously, Ukraine needs a lot of additional financial assistance. Last year was very peculiar, I guess, in the eyes of many foreign investors and foreign politicians even, I would say. In the eyes of them, Ukraine is always asking for money. Ukraine always receiving financial assistance from abroad, but that has not been necessarily the case. Last year, which was very difficult year for Ukraine from a military standpoint of view, from economic standpoint of view, we received $9 billion of credits, loans, not assistance, not grants, loans, and we gave back $14 billion. So basically all the money that we received was paid back and more from the central bank reserves.
But when we say the more...
this time around, we are doing obviously very intense discussions with individual countries, with EU, with
Apart
the US,
from IMF.
apart from IMF, and they all coming together. And IMF is the anchor in this program, and we're talking, over $30 billion that altogether is going to come for Ukraine.
Along with the IMF as an additional part to IMF?
The total package is going to be between $30 and $40 billion, depending on how you count and when it comes and so on. It is very important that the first tranche comes as big as possible, meaning that the program is front-loaded, because central bank reserves are very low right now. Confidence, as I said, is quite low. So I think the first tranche is going to be reasonable in the amount so that we regain that confidence. And I'm optimistic that together with all these reforms that government has planned, we will slowly but surely get out of these economic troubles.
Now let's go to the part why this money isn't coming so quickly right now, to the reforms. If we would be really, really specific on your specific ministry, we know that there's a number of reforms planned, we've heard them. What are the key directions of your ministry that you are right now doing? And maybe there's already some success you can share with us, and something really, really specific.
Yeah, I've been 3 months almost now in this position, so obviously we have some quick wins as well. The good thing about IMF program is that Ukraine commits itself to a good number of reforms. Every ministry had to write down 2 main reforms it is going to attempt. It is committed to throughout the 4-year program of International Monetary Fund.
So what is your commitment?
2 reforms per year. As for the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade, number 1 is deregulation. We want to make sure that we make conditions for business as favorable as possible. We want to limit states' involvement in the economy. We want to allow business to feel that conditions are improving. Right now we're number 96 in the world doing business rankings. We are committed to be top 50 in 2 years. Number 2 reform is state-owned enterprise reform. We have 3,374 state-owned enterprises, of which only 1,900 in operation. Others are in the process of merging or being liquidated. Vast majority of those companies are run for the benefit not of all of us, of the state, but for the benefit of some private individuals. There is the so-called asymmetry of information, where those that work in the company and benefit from the cash flows have a different type of information from the owners, which is the state, and we want to break that.
How do we do that?
We already passed a couple of government decrees. One, which is called Decree 777, which outlines a new order how CEOs are selected for state-owned companies. So within 10 days, when the vacancy emerges for the CEO position, a line minister launches an independent tender seeking a new CEO through a transparent procedure involving independent parties like Big Four audit companies and so on. For top 60 companies, there is an additional filter that involves the so-called nomination committee, which is 5 line ministers, all with investment banking background, including myself, and 5 independent members, which is heads of World Bank, IFC, EBRD here, Business Ombudsman, and Director of Kyiv School of Economics. We also passed a decree about the so-called transparency guidelines, which means that every company where state has over 50% ownership has to publish its financial accounts, has to publish its strategy, and has to publish a number of other financial items. So far that has not been the case, but from now on they are obliged to do that.
There was an idea to sell them, right? To sell part of these companies to Western-owned companies or to with the Western management. But how do you sell these companies when the country is at war practically?
Yes, obviously, I still believe that state is a bad owner. So eventually all of those companies, or majority of those companies that are not deemed to be strategic, they should be privatized. Obviously, ideally, we would like them to end up in the hands of foreign strategic investors. We have sold a number of enterprises before to local tycoons, and we know how we all ended up there. Entire industries have been monopolized and so on. But going back to the reforms in my ministry, so these are two reforms. Number 3 reform is ministry restructuring in itself. Number 4 is public procurement. We have completely inefficient and corrupt system right now. We can save at least 20% on procurement once we put those in the sort of a public domain, do through electronic tenders and so on. Number 5 is anti-monopoly. We wrote down. Even though it's cabinet proposing the candidate prime minister and Verkhovna Rada approving, it was still under the Ministry of Economic Development, where we committed to changing head of anti-monopoly committee in the first half and the rest of the committee, and in the second half we are committed to changing legislation. All businesses, local and foreign, have been complaining about how anti-monopoly committee works for years. So it is very important to change committee and legislation.
We have a package passing probably tomorrow, right? What is this package about? Is there some certain draft laws you were working on, your ministry was working on?
Yes, there will be basically a couple of parts of basically types of laws that will be passed. One package is when it comes to IMF agreement. The other more relates to the World Bank, the so-called DPL2 program, which is $1.3 billion from the World Bank and from the Japanese government. When it comes particularly to the DPL2, is 10 laws, 10 prior actions that need to be taken place, and 2 of those on Tuesday or Monday will be passed with the help of Ministry of Economic Development. One of those is, for example, about state investments. So far, 90% of investments that were done from the budget by the basically federal by the government have never been economically justified. Most of the projects never end. So the requirement in that law stipulates that from now on all investments would have to be economically justified. There would be an independent commission consisting
created
of
as a separate institution?
Yes. No, more or less under the umbrella of the Ministry of Economic Development that would basically analyze these investments. And from now on, there would be a condition that priorities to those projects that have not been completed yet, like the Ahmedet hospital that is still being built, for years and years and years. Under the new rules, priority would be to get money to finish those projects that have started before. This is just one of the sort of the examples. Overall, it's about the budget and it's also about changes in the tax code.
There's a really interesting thing that everyone who is dealing with reforms is talking about. Some things that come in way of Ukrainian reforms. We heard people from Georgia, we heard it from your predecessor, Pavlo Sheremeta, who left the ministry, that there are certain things that really make these reforms really, really hard to implement, like bureaucracy and like capital or private interests in politics and in economy. How do you tackle that? How do you fight that?
These are really very important points of resistance, that's for sure. But if you look from a historical perspective, I believe that current parliament is the least dependent on oligarchs since independence, so their influence is definitely falling. Many of the oligarchs have also seen their fortunes tumble during this crisis. Many have possibly loans exceeding the value of their assets.
Could you be more specific? Who exactly?
I mean, we know someone is on a house arrest in Austria, and we no longer have any middlemen in the gas trading business. Right now, we buy more gas from Europe than from Russia, and there is no middleman involved in the gas trade whatsoever. We also passed a law about transfer pricing, which means that previously chemical industry and mining industry.
You're talking about Mr. Firtash, right?
On the chemical side, yes. They would sell to their entities abroad products at cost in order not to be taxed in Ukraine, but to be taxed in lower tax havens like Cyprus and Switzerland and so on. We basically passed a law prohibiting this type of situation where hundreds of millions of dollars were moved out and taxed at single-digit tax rates abroad. So clearly there is a fight against big business. For big business, what we say is that time for unfair subsidies and unfair treatment is over, but we will do all it takes to create level playing field, to deregulate economy so that your asset prices eventually will rise as well. On the bureaucracy front, obviously there is a lot of resistance as well. In my own ministry I have 1,300 people, and this year we are committed to 50% cuts in staff. First stage is 30%, and then we do some more towards the autumn. I am also a believer that we have too large state apparatus, and we need to cut that, but raise salaries, and over time quite dramatically raise salaries.
Do you have a personal, sorry to interrupt, a personal timeline when you can see that this doesn't work or this works, and for example you leave because you promised so much when you entered the ministry? I know it's only 3 months, but still it's almost a year since the government changed, since so much changed in Ukraine, almost a year, and not so much regarding reforms. Do you have like your personal timeline when you see that it's taking too much time?
Obviously, we will feel that in some massive waves of criticism if some of the things that we have been promising have not been delivered. So far, when it comes to ministry in itself, things are a bit slower than initially expected, but on the deregulation front, on the state-owned enterprise front, on public procurement, we're more or less working in line with the initial agenda, just as with the cutting staff and functions and restructuring of the ministry. I believe sometimes we're not good at basically making ourselves heard. Some of the things that we do, since the effect is not really felt right away, I think the effect will be maybe in 6 months' time, maybe 9 months' time.
So it's about 6 months' time. Let's see.
Yes.
Let's see.
If we fail in that, obviously, most of us or all of us will have to leave.
Okay, we will see in 6 months' time, and hopefully talk to you in 6 months' time, to you and to maybe some of business here in Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So we'll be moving forward, but we're not leaving the economic topic. We really would like to look closely into what is really happening with Hryvnia, and also with other national currencies in post-Soviet countries. And we have on Skype Yuri Gorodnichenko, professor of economics from Berkeley, California. Yuri, good evening. Do you hear us? Yuri, do you hear us? Probably some technical problems. Again, we'd like to talk to Yuri Gorodnichenko, professor of economics from Berkeley, California, on what is exactly happening to Hryvnia and who is exactly to blame with what is happening. Yuri, hello, good evening. How do you hear us?
Hi, I'm fine.
Oh, hello. In your opinion, what exactly is happening with Ukrainian national currency right now?
Well, we can easily see that there is a problem with the Ukrainian currency. It has depreciated a lot in recent days, and the National Bank of Ukraine is taking a set of emergency actions to defend Crimea. And, this may seem unpopular, but the choice set is very limited, and we basically have a choice between something very terrible and something very bad. You choose bad instead of terrible. So this is what's going on with Crimea now.
Do you think it's mainly the war to blame if we talk overall about the economic situation and specifically about Hryvnia? Is it really the war to blame in the current situation?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question well.
My question was, what is the main factor of this situation with the national currency in Ukraine? Is it really the war to blame in the current situation?
Okay, so we can look at the fundamentals of what happens in Ukraine and then look at some sort of non-fundamental factors. The fundamental factor that Ukrainian hryvnia was overvalued for a long time. 8 hryvnias per dollar was not sustainable. So I think we should start with that. It was a starting point. The hryvnia must have been devalued, right? So there is no way out of that. Now, what should be the level after this depreciation is an open question. But, it certainly didn't look like 30 hryvnias per dollar is a reasonable equilibrium outcome. Now, what are the forces that move hryvnia into depreciation, right? So one source of sort of pressure on hryvnia is an open war in eastern Ukraine. So it creates a sense of uncertainty. People want to store their savings in a sort of stable unit of currency. That's one. Second, the government has to spend a lot on military purposes. This creates an enormous fiscal deficit. Just this year, we know that the government committed to spend 5% of GDP on national security. It's a very significant amount. That's one. Second, we have a big problem in the banking system, right? So many banks fail every day. The central bank, the National Bank of Ukraine, has to provide emergency funding to the banking system, because if we stop banking system, if we let it collapse, the whole economy is going to collapse very quickly. So you have, at the same time, two forces. You have to inject money into the economy to support the banking system. You also need to help the central government to finance their expenditures for military purposes. But you can't borrow money from abroad. Right? Ukraine cannot go in the bond market and say, we want to borrow this much to finance our expenses. This creates these inflationary pressures that, people understand that the next step is going to be inflation. They want to take their savings from hryvnias, convert them into dollars. We have a very classic capital flight, a sudden stop when the government cannot borrow and the capital tries to flee the country.
Yeah, we can really see Ukrainians panicking a little bit. But the question is, what do you think the government could do to win back that trust, to make people bring their money back to Ukrainian banks?
Okay, exactly. Yeah. So we have that, and then we have a panic when people just think, okay, everything is going to fall apart. It's a desperate situation. If you don't convert your hryvnias into dollars, it's going to be too late tomorrow. So we have a classic panic. Now, what the central bank did, introduce capital controls, is basically one of the options. You could, cut spending, cut healthcare, cut education, cut safety net, cut lots and lots of things on the government spending side. Or you can start selling dollars and buying hryvnias to defend the national currency, or you can introduce capital controls. I think the government did the right thing. They introduced capital controls, but they didn't communicate this properly. So I think what should happen is that there should be a consistent message coming from the Prime Minister, from the National Bank of Ukraine, from the President, from the Parliament, in fact, that they all work together to stabilize hryvnia. There is a clear vision, and there is every reason to be optimistic about why hryvnia should recover.
And we didn't see that. We didn't see that coming. We didn't see that communication happening here in Ukraine, right?
You didn't see a consistent message, or you didn't see a good fundamental?
We didn't see the communication work as well, apart from other measures. But our last question is about maybe if we look into the situation a little bit broader and we analyze a little bit broader the economic situation in the post-Soviet area, we can see that Moldovan national currency falling down. We can see Azerbaijan national currency falling down. Of course, it's a specific story in every specific country, but is there any joint factor for all of those countries? What is in common in all those situations in Ukraine, in Azerbaijan, and Moldova? What do you think is the?
So in Ukraine, the situation is a little different from other countries because we have a war. For all other countries in the post-Soviet space, the key issue is that the Russian ruble depreciated a lot, right? And for many of these countries, Russia is the main trading partner. If they want to keep their goods competitive in the Russian market, they have to have a depreciation of their national currencies. In Azerbaijan, it was an extra step because they also depend on oil revenue, gas revenue. And so similar to Russia, they had to depreciate their currencies. They don't want to have problems later, like Ukraine has done. So Ukraine, to some extent, already depreciated the currency. We don't have to do that anymore to stay competitive on the Russian markets. Just, if we think about the economic component of this. So, again, the common force is, depreciation of Russian ruble. For countries to have their goods competitive in Russia, they have to depreciate. And that's why we see this common trend in the post-Soviet camp.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Yuri. We had Yuri Gorodnichenko, professor of economics, Berkeley, California, with us on Skype, talking about not only the situation of the national currency in Ukraine, but also trying to look into a broader situation as well in Moldova, in Azerbaijan, and other countries, trying to figure out what's in common in economy in this region. And now we'll be moving forward. We have an interesting piece we have prepared for you. Hromadske has traveled to Vinnytsia. This is the city where the Donetsk National University moved in October after what has been happening in Donetsk. Part of this university, let's say the pro-Ukrainian part, decided to move out from Donetsk and settle the university in Vinnytsia, which is not a small and not a big city in central Ukraine, the city that doesn't have a classical university. This is why this decision was taken specifically for Vinnytsia. According to what we heard from the professors and from the students, around 60 to 70% of the administration and the students moved along with the university. As we were there last week, the exams were underway. The session was already ending, and more students were arriving to Vinnytsia. The only problem that the students are facing right now is where they live. Actually, in Donetsk, the university used to have over 6 dormitories, and in Vinnytsia, of course, it's really hard to find place for all the people from the administration, the professors, the students. So Hromadske has talked both to professors, to students. We have talked to them not only about the process of how the learning process is organized in Vinnytsia, but we've also talked about what has been left back in Donetsk, what people are missing, how do they interact with local administration in Vinnytsia, how do they interact with local students. So it's a really interesting video, and we highly recommend it. Please watch it now.
Hromadske перебуває у Вінниці. От сюди буквально в жовтні приїхав Донецький національний університет. Ось цю 7-поверхову будівлю університету віддав Вінницький ювелірний завод «Кристал». Взагалі в університеті навчається близько 6 тисяч людей на різних формах навчання, але фізично тут у Вінниці плюс-мінус перебувають близько 1000 студентів. Тут завершуються останні дні сесії, студенти складають останні іспити. Ми приїхали подивитися, як вони взагалі облаштувалися у Вінниці. Фактично перший український університет в екзилі.
Видите, что у вашего кодекса на уровне министерств, да, на уровне...
Большая часть оборудования, которое вот здесь сейчас в лаборатории присутствует, это частично факультетское и в большей степени личное оборудование преподавателей. Вот. Кто чем мог, помог. Лаборатории обустроены, оборудование, все осталось действительно там, и с разработками уже, даже конкретно с материалами. Самое ценное осталось, это, наверное, наработки по робототехнике, которые мы начинали. Вот буквально у нас такой прорыв был серьезный последние полгода. Когда я работал на факультете, были уже собраны некоторые прототипы роботов, в том числе роботы-саперы. То есть мы уже собрали механику, и нам необходимо было, то есть, так сказать, вложить мозг, создать программное обеспечение. И вот именно механика, конечно, это обидно, что там осталось. Ну, насколько мне известно, так по источникам, что никто даже не понял, что это роботы. Вот. И общем-то, как-то оно растащили. Ну, да, не знаю, куда именно, ну, в общем-то, я думаю, что это посчитали, что это хлам.
Да, вот это моя комната, я тут живу.
А сколько вас здесь живет?
Человек, 3 человека. Один мой сосед живет тут, второй Антон там живет. И вот, собственно, моя кровать новенькая. Только завезли.
Когда переехал сюда?
Приехал сюда 4 дня назад. Ну, сначала хотел квартиру снимать с другом, потом посмотрел цены на квартиры, они выросли буквально. Ой, ну я смотрел сейчас однокомнатную можно найти за 2000. Ну, я ориентировался на цену немножко ниже. Ну, по такой цене я не мог найти. Вот, но сейчас однокомнатная 2000 и выше. Вот.
А за это общежитие сколько вы платите?
Это общежитие 250 гривен в месяц. И мне кажется, что за такую цену, ну, мало где можно нормально как бы пожить. Тут условия очень хорошие. И кормят иногда. Все говорят о политике, и поэтому как-то на эту тему уже даже не хочется разговаривать, поэтому я ее не затрагиваю. Я понимаю, что ребята поддержат Украину, я тоже, в принципе, за Украину. И посмотрим, если будет все налаживаться, уже будет какая-то гарантия того, что войны больше не будет, конечно, вернусь туда.
Даже если там будет оставаться ДНР?
Ну, я же думаю, с этим что-то поделают все-таки.
Кто?
Я не знаю, кто с этим будет что-то делать. Ну, понимаете, ну, ДНР, Украина, какая разница, это все люди. Главное, щоб був порядок.
Ні, на цю тему я взагалі не хочу нього питати, бо я навіть не знаю, на якій він стороні, і мені навіть, ну, мені цікаво, але я боюсь, що він буде проти України, наприклад. То якщо я спитаю, то в мене думка поміняється про нього. А так все нормально.
Когда он комментируется, с ним происходит толкование. Вы представляете объем изменений в этот нормативный права? И когда вы это видите, вы уже не будете руководить.
37 студентів були в полоні з факультету.
А студенти, вони повернулися з цих полонів? І що від них хотіли там в полоні, власне?
Це студенти, які спочатку і системно брали участь у мітингах проукраїнських і демонстрували постійно і в соціальних мережах, і конкретними вчинками і словами свою громадську позицію.
Їм вдалося визволити з цих полонів?
35.
А двоє досі перебувають в полоні?
Я не знаю про їх долю, на жаль.
So from Donetsk University in Vinnytsia, we're going to Crimea. A year has passed since the annexation. How did it exactly happen in Crimea? What are the legal grounds and what was the legal context, not the grounds of what happened? A year ago, a group of international lawyers has prepared a very interesting report which goes into detail of the legal context of the annexation. And we have one of the authors of this report with us from New York on Skype. This is a very interesting group which works closely for the organization called Razom, or Together in English. It's a Ukrainian-American human rights organization, and part of the authors were studying at New York University School of Law while preparing this report. So we will talk to Ivana Bilic, General Counsel of Razom for Ukraine, about the legal issues of the annexation. Ivana, good evening. How do you hear us?
Good evening, Angelina. I hear you well.
So, Ivana, this report outlines a report that you prepared last year. It outlines the main legal context of this annexation. What would you point out of this? It's a big report. It's over the 70 pages. What are the main parts and the main issues of your work?
Well, There are quite a few. We started working on the report back in February, March last year, and it was an amazing group of individuals and scholars, lawyers that worked together, and professorship obviously was amazing. And we were concerned with lots of issues, obviously, everything that was happening at Maidan. However, we were not able to cover all the human rights violations with respect to massive killings. So we started the report with the Yanukovych fleeing the country and analyzing whether it was legal or illegal and what are implications. And as we know, then Russia invaded Crimea and started exercising on the eastern borders of Ukraine. And the situation was developing quite rapidly. So we basically focused on the referendum in Crimea, annexation of Crimea, and we also, for us, for the scholars, it was obvious that many violations were happening. As I indicated, the fact that Russia was claiming that they 100,000 of troops exercising on the border with Ukraine is an act of aggression on its own. So we did make an attempt back then in March 2014 to project what would be the implications. And by then, obviously, the annexation already happened. And so,
Ivana, my question is that you worked really hard to also prepare some recommendations for Ukraine, for Russia, for the international community on how to work with this. This is a huge precedent since the World War II. So could you please tell us about those recommendations? What were the main recommendations legal-wise, yes, for Ukraine and for the international community?
Obviously, yes. We look at the countermeasures. We look at and we analyze possible recommendations. Obviously, for Russia, the recommendation was to withdraw its troops and restore the status quo and make sure that Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity are not violated, and this remains our main recommendation to Russia, obviously. As we know, there were no human rights violation happening in Crimea or in eastern Ukraine. They didn't have any separatist movements worth of concern, and this was absolutely illegal, and the General Assembly recognized those facts as well. The recommendations to the international community were work closely with Ukrainian authorities and with Ukrainian civil society with respect to ensuring the human rights are not violated. Or, as we know, the situation like annexation of Crimea, such a change contributes to the massive violation of human rights, and we know that some of those massive human rights violations ended up in many people dying. For example, with respect, we looked into the right to health, for example, and we know that people who were on the methadone and needle exchange programs, they were prohibited to continue on those programs because Russia is not recognizing those programs under World Health Organization.
They had to move out, or what happened to them?
Ukraine offered, basically it's a dire situation, Ukraine offered to them to move out, but Ukraine, being a young democracy, obviously didn't also acted quick enough, and some of them moved to the mainland, some of them moved to Russia, and some of them died, sadly died. So those are very sad instances, and currently we know that Russia has been imposing its citizenship on Ukrainian citizens. There are massive human rights violations. So back then, our recommendations were to work closely on various issues with the civil society and giving Ukraine any assistance it may need. We didn't specifically spell it out to anything with respect to the weapons, but of course that was warranted, that if needed, Ukraine obviously has to receive it, since tons of treaties and international agreements have been violated, and the international legal system basically failed Ukraine and its people. And
Ivana, this is what exactly to ask you as our last question. What, in your opinion, exactly could Ukrainian civil society do in advocating human rights in Crimea, in advocating Crimea in general, and is it really Ukrainian society who is doing right now more maybe than Ukrainian government, in your opinion?
I do think so. I do, but I wouldn't even compare who does more and who does less, because Ukraine is a young democracy. Obviously, Ukrainian government has a lot in its plate, but the civil society does a tremendous job, and it's supposed to. And any democratic society has an active civil society. And what I would like to see the Ukrainian government working closely with the civil society on the ground. From what we now, it's very superficial. They're trying, but it's very superficial, and they're hiding between the state secrets, behind different definitions, which actually don't have any legal standing, and they should work very closely. Civil society should remain active. There are many great initiatives on the ground. Many individuals are doing great job. And they should stay and remain active. They should actually even unify some efforts and continue recording those human rights violations, taking them to court, writing to different organizations, writing to the ombudsman. I would like to see the Ukrainian government actually staying very active with respect to monitoring those violations. Right now we're working on our second report, and it's actually right now in the editing stage, and we have very specific recommendations. And we had several meetings with the Ukrainian government officials. I haven't seen a positive response from them. I don't know if they know what to do even with those type of reports and recommendations. But what we would like to see much closer cooperation with the civil society on the ground. And we would like to see those violations reported and taken to different stages to the European Court of Human Rights.
Thank you, Ivana, so much. That's a wonderful recommendation. We'll be following your tremendous work and following your next reports, which you probably are preparing, and following your work. Thank you so much. We were talking to Ivana Bilic, a lawyer from New York, she's the general counsel of Razum for Ukraine. She's working in a huge team of international lawyers in legal context, legal issues of the annexation and of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So we'll be moving forward to London and to the section on diplomacy and aid proposed to Ukraine. So last week, British Prime Minister David Cameron announced that Britain will be soon deploying some troops to Ukraine for training Ukrainians. It's about 75 people of the military personnel. And before switching to analysis, why did it happen now, and what should it mean in a broader sense, we will listen to the soundbite of David Cameron at the Committee of Foreign Affairs. So let's listen to what the British Prime Minister had to say.
We're not at the stage of supplying lethal equipment. We have announced a whole series of non-lethal equipment, night vision goggles, body armor, which we have already said that we would give to Ukraine. Over the course of the next month, we're going to be deploying British service personnel to provide advice and a range of training, from tactical intelligence to logistics to medical care, which is something else that they have asked for. And we'll also be developing an infantry training program with Ukraine to improve the durability of their forces. This would involve a number of British service personnel. They will be largely they'll be well away from the area of conflict.
So we will try to analyze what does this decision of Great Britain mean. From London, from United Kingdom, we will have on Skype, we already have on Skype, Orisa Lutsevich from Chatham House. Orisa, good evening. How do you hear us?
It's very bad connection.
It's very bad. How do you hear us now? Again, is it better? Any much better? Orisa?
Да.
Do you hear us now?
Yes, but yes, now I can hear you better.
Okay, great. So we have to be really quick, so we have just a couple of questions for you. What does this decision to send over British troops really mean at this point while we have troops withdrawal in the eastern Ukraine? What does this mean?
There is a desire from the European Union and particularly some EU member states to reinforce Ukrainian capability to protect its territorial integrity and sovereignty. This actually decision is in line with what NATO in Wales decided last year to build Ukrainian military capacity. And there's a special program from NATO already in place, and some NATO member states are following the same path.
Orisa, just before this statement, we had a report from the House of Lords saying that Ukraine is guilty of sleepwalking into the crisis in Ukraine. What is your assessment of that report and of that statement? Is there really an understanding that the UK somehow missed the beginning of this conflict and now trying to catch up with it?
Frankly, I think it's less of an issue of expertise or understanding what is going on the ground, and more an issue of, paradigm difficulty, how to deal with the resurgent and revanchist Russia. Because events in Georgia in 2008 already demonstrated what Russia is capable of. And I'm sure that the UK diplomats were informing the capitals and the Foreign Office about developments on the ground. If you look at the WikiLeaks reports, what was going on in Crimea with all the pro-Russian and, paramilitary groups that were financed since 2008. The problem, I think, is that the West struggles to devise a robust strategy to respond to this kind of Russia. They were more sleepwalking on the paradigm that perhaps it will somehow stop by itself, or perhaps there will be no protest in Ukraine against Russia. And I think this is a bigger underestimation and mistake, is about Ukraine and the national identity and the pro-European force that was forming inside Ukraine.
Orisa, with the Ukrainian with the troops withdrawal in eastern Ukraine and this decision coming, how do you think this withdrawal will change the situation, not only on the ground, but in a diplomatic sense? What may it change? Does it sounds like a sign of peace coming, or what do you think it may change?
I think Ukrainian government is doing everything possible to reassure the European allies that Kyiv wants peace. That's why Ukrainian government is cooperative on the Minsk protocol, provided the baseline information to OSCE to make sure they can monitor the withdrawal of troops. It's in a way to prove also to Chancellor Merkel that Kyiv is on a peaceful track, but is ready also to protect, if needed, Ukrainian territory from further incursion from the separatist fighters.
Thank you so much, Orisa. We had Orisa Lutsevich from London, Orisa Lutsevich from Chatham House, analyzing the latest statement from the British Prime Minister and the decision to deploy British troops to Ukraine, who will probably train Ukrainian military here in Ukraine. And now we will be moving to our next segment, which is really interesting. We were looking forward to it. We will talk about young Ukrainian enthusiasts and intellectuals working on Ukrainian strategy. This group of these people, the enthusiasts and intellectuals, is called Nestor Group, and we have Alexandra from this group. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Alexandra, could you explain us what is this group about, and how did you come up with the idea of forming it?
Not only young, it's 17 experts from different walks of life and different professions. I would say they're young in their hearts, but the experts are definitely of different age and of different backgrounds. And it's important that somebody with a historic background has to be able to express himself and make his concepts understood to somebody who is an educationist or a mathematician, and this helps to come up with something that will be later understood elsewhere.
You prepared some kind of a document, a report, or just outlining the main ideas of your group, of what you're going to work on, which is called like a strategy.
It's a vision. It's a strategic vision. What it does, it provides a kind of description of a country we would like to live in, and we would like to live behind ourselves for our children. So it's a strategic vision, not yet the steps. Not yet a strategy to reach it, but what we hope for is that it helps to reach a consensus in the society about what kind of country we want essentially to arrive at.
In this document, you're saying that the idea of Ukrainian nation was to form a nation, was to build up a nation, and this task is already done. So what's the idea of Ukrainian nation right now?
You refer to the national idea, yes? Yeah, we definitely...
The idea of the,
the national idea. What we understood is that the process of forming Ukrainian nation, when we look at the research, when we look at what is happening in the society, then we can consider that this task the country has already fulfilled it. And what we need now is to shift to the social modernization of this nation, to the development of this nation. And as a consequence, it helps us to understand that the kind of steps that are usually needed to build a nation, say the question of language, they become of a lesser priority when we speak together about the future we want to create. So it helps us to identify the priorities, and the priorities should shift to developing the nation, to modernizing it, and to sustainable development. That's the main point of the document, and the main thing we were sharing with whoever was interested in and is interested in is that we should shift to the idea of sustainable development and of social modernization of the nation instead of just building it.
So, of course, we're not talking about language or any other issues regarding the.
It's just a matter of priorities.
So, what are the priorities in the future? What is that the Ukrainian nation could form around and find its main messages, main ideas?
Yeah. First of all, the idea of sustainable development refers to us moving from what we have, and we formulated it as a corruption consensus. It's been existing for years, and as citizens of this country, we understand that it's very difficult to move around and to lead your life being not part of it. It is so it's gotten so deep into the fabric of society. In public, we would say that corruption is bad. And then going around your daily tasks is very tough if you still adhere to it. It is possible. It's just very tough, and a lot of social institutions and practices in culture, they kind of accept it and consider it normal. So first thing
so it's like a public consensus around that issue.
Unfortunately,
that
now
should be broken or should be changed.
Now the public consensus, the unspoken one, is that we do have a corruption consensus, and what we offer is that we should move from it to the open access system, which means that the sustainable development is not something that's a abstract concept. It is something that can be a filter for checking lots of decisions from the national level, like drafts of laws, and all the way to the ways schools are organized and the decisions that the local councils are made.
That's a great idea, but how do you do that in practice? How do you implement those ideas in practice, and what exactly the group will be doing?
What we call to the document is the contract of dignity for sustainable development. So dignity, first of all, we found out through analyzing different researches already available that it is one of those things that one of the two things that all of the Ukrainians already agree upon. One is that they see Ukraine as an independent country, and that's across the country with no difference of age or sex or nationality and ethnicity. And the second one is that dignity is important. And out of 9 kind of points we formulated for this new contract of dignity for sustainable development, these 2 are those that we have already, that Ukrainians see themselves as an independent nation and that dignity is important. By the way, they see it very differently in different parts of society.
Sure.
But everybody would agree that it's important for him or her. Not everybody, the majority would definitely agree. And the others include things like, for example, we used to speak that we are so different in East and West and so ever. So what we offer in this new contract of dignity for sustainable development is actually to embrace this diversity and to understand that from being different, we can create something new and unique together. Instead of going into deep discussions of exactly how different we are and how bad it is, we offer to look at it as at something from which the country can actually benefit.
Talking about East and West, how do you reintegrate occupied Donbass in this paradigm? Do you have an idea of how the occupied territories should be reintegrated back into this new Ukraine that you are seeing in your vision, let's say, that you are planning in your...
Look, we certainly don't have all the answers.
Of course.
But what we consider important is that if people, if fellow countrymen share a common vision, then all the rest is a matter of coming up with hundreds and thousands of ideas of how it can be implemented. For example, setting the priorities right everywhere in the society, from the educational programs at schools to what is on the public service broadcast, to the priorities of laws being drafted and voted in the parliament.
We were exactly asking our viewers to comment on through Twitter on how they see Ukraine in 10 years from now, right? In 2025. So Darius Tamoskas says that he sees Ukraine as independent, democratic, developing, pride, and smiling. From Mariana Simon, she envisions Ukraine as free, strong, democratic, European, and happy. These are the tweets. Alexandra, really interesting. In your opinion, what are the main potentials in Ukraine? What are the main resources in Ukraine?
One of the things that we discussed as a group and came to a conclusion is that Ukraine is rich in natural resources, but this is not enough in modern economy. We don't have enough natural resources to build wealth and going further to build well-being of people. So the main resource the country should develop is the human resource. It is not even seen as a resource, it is the development of human potential. So if I would have to answer briefly, that's human potential. And that's helping it to open up and realize.
What are the next plans of your group? What do you plan in the nearest future to do?
To tell you the truth, we have just presented the document on which we worked for over 3 years, because each of us we have our own careers, and we were working on this as volunteers. We didn't yet have time to properly discuss to give you an extended answer, but in brief, we want to share, because the mission of the group was to develop. Now we want to make sure that it reaches different parts, different groups in the society. This Tuesday we presented it to the international community and to those Ukrainians who were interested. There was a huge presentation at Mistetsky Arsenal. What we are planning now is to help it be understood in different parts of the society. But it's important that it's not only on top. We see it as both communicating it to the government and the presidential administration, if needed, to every
So you're
MP.
planning to work with the governmental agencies in the first place? Well,
our work is to share what we have. We aren't ourselves an agency. We are a self-organized group of experts.
Did someone already reach out to you?
You know what? Embassies reacted than our own government institutions. We have several requests from embassies to share and to help understand how their priorities in supporting, for example, Ukrainian civil society, can embrace what the Nestor group was speaking about. But I'm sure it's just a matter of communication. We will work on making this vision understood. But we also think it's important that it's understood from the grassroots level. Because the way we see it implemented, look, we're just a small group of people. We aren't almighty. We see that if it's understood on grassroots level, then it's people who demand it from politicians. And then we can have both the bottom-up and the grassroots-up approach. And probably this is the only way that any decision can be sustainable in Ukraine. It has to be supported from grassroots. You can't just hope on excellent leadership and on somebody proclaiming a new vision and all the people just joining in. We as Ukrainians need to understand that what politicians speak up is something that we already believe in. That's part of being Ukrainian.
That the Ukrainians are going several steps ahead of the politicians, which is an obvious fact.
We just need a social consensus, and we need it on grassroots level. It's good when politicians speak what we believe in, but we need to believe in it, I wouldn't say first, but we definitely need to believe in the concepts that they will be voicing.
A wonderful initiative to start your work with, and a wonderful note, a wonderful story to finish our show for tonight. We'll be finishing our show. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Please watch us next Sunday, 8 o'clock Kyiv time. Thank you.
Ми, журналісти та ведучі Громадського, ми вирушаємо на схід.
Любого врага мы не пропустим дальше.
Есть люди, которые нормально, которые в открытую нормально поддерживают Украину.
Громадське потребує твоєї підтримки. Ми належимо громадянам України і є некомерційним проектом. Підтримати проект можна, перерахувавши гроші через PayPal, Приват24 або Money.ua. Громадське існує за рахунок саме твоєї підтримки.